And Russia's marking the 80th birthday of the man who took perestroika to another level when the Soviet Union dissolved, Boris Yeltsin. 4 years after his death, the first president of Russia is remembered for his reforms, free market aspirations, and privatization policies. Well, we can now cross live to our correspondent, Oksana Boiko, and get more on this. Oksana, how's Russia remembering Yeltsin today?
Well, it needs to be said that Yeltsin's 80th would-be birthday is celebrated with much greater pomp than was celebrated his 70th anniversary. A series of events are planned across the country. And, of course, the main event is the opening, the unveiling of the monument, a white marble obelisk that you can see behind me. But in addition to that, a lot of events are planned across the country. A rock concert will take place here in Yekaterinburg, a series of photo exhibitions, a tennis tournament for children. Tennis was, of course, the very popular sport and the favorite sport of Boris Yeltsin. But the center of festivities is, of course, the city of Yekaterinburg, formerly known as Sverdlovsk, a hometown of Boris Yeltsin, a city where he got his university degree, a city where he became an engineer, where he advanced through the party ranks, where he got married and lived for most of his life. Now, the white obelisk that you can see behind me is the second monument to Boris Yeltsin erected in Russia. The first one was unveiled in 2008 at the Novodevichy cemetery where he was buried. And in addition to that, Yekaterinburg will also see the opening of the memorial center dedicated to Boris Yeltsin. This tradition was borrowed from the United States. You know that in the States, in America, there's a wide net of presidential libraries dedicated to the legacies of former president, and some of Boris Yeltsin's aides thought that it was a very good idea to establish a similar center here in Russia, a center that will be dedicated to promotion of civil society and human rights. And it is not a coincidence that soon after this unveiling ceremony, the current president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who was also present here and who helped to unveil the monument, will be presiding over the meeting of a council dedicated to civil society and human rights.
Oksana, Boris Yeltsin was at the helm of the country for almost a decade. How do people look back on his years in power?
Well, Boris Yeltsin has always been and remains a highly polarizing figure in the Russian society. He's generally credited for bringing democracy to Russia. Both of his successors, Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev, commended him for making the Russian democracy irreversible. He was also overseeing a major transition of the world's largest command economy into a free market one. But all those reforms came at a very high price for the Russian society and were hard on many people in Russia. In almost a decade that he was in power, Russia's external debt has increased by 60%. Russia's suicide rate has increased by 70%. And for many people, it was indeed a very, very hard transition. They blamed him for not preventing the collapse of the Soviet Union and for not softening this blow for the majority of Russians. But at the same time, it needs to be said, as the time goes by, most Russians are growing a bit more sympathetic on Yeltsin, and there is a number of polls to support that. The latest one was released by the Levada Center, an independent polling organization, just a couple of days ago, and it found that the number of people who viewed Yeltsin's legacy in negative terms has decreased from some 60% in 2000 to 35% in 2011, while the percentage of people who had either a neutral or positive opinion of his policies has increased to over 60%. So indeed, times proves very healing, not only for the family, who is obviously still grieving the loss of Yeltsin, but also for his legacy at large.
Right, well, Oksana, I'd like to remind our viewers that we are watching a live ceremony there from Yekaterinburg, where the ceremony of unveiling of Yeltsin Memorial is taking place. And before we let you go, we know that apart from being a politician, Yeltsin was, of course, a family man. So 4 years on, what's his family's abiding memory of him?
Well, it is true. Yeltsin was survived by a widow and 2 daughters, and all of them were present at the ceremony today. Now, his bond to his wife was really heartbreaking and really touching. They met while still students here in Yekaterinburg, or rather Sverdlovsk as it was known at the time. They got married a year after graduation, and they stayed together for more than 50 years. And Naina Yeltsina, his widow, who was present at the ceremony today, was moved to tears to see his monument unveiled, and she said that he's still greatly missed on this day.
He never doubted he would live to celebrate his 100th birthday, but instead his widow has to fight back tears while opening an exhibition timed to what have been his 80th jubilee. In nearly 4 years since Boris Yeltsin's death, the agony of loss has given way to quiet remembrance.
He really liked family gatherings, birthdays. We usually celebrated with our daughters.
Most of these photos show Yeltsin in his early years in power, when he had the backing of almost the entire country, when voicing your political position was still an act of nobility and courage, and when hopes of a different life in a better country were still untainted by the harsh reality. The war in Chechnya, which Yeltsin himself admitted was a mistake, the banking crisis that would cripple the already impoverished population, all of these would come later, and, as some argue, would unfairly obscure all the good that Yeltsin had done.
Anything large is better perceived from a distance, especially in history. I think we still need more time for the emotions and troubles to give way to serious analysis of what a titanic figure Yeltsin really was.
Vladimir Shevchenko served as his head of protocol for more than 8 years. And while Yeltsin's explosive character and unpredictable temperament often contravened the dry rules of diplomatic engagement, Vladimir says he had never had a better boss.
He never thwarted a single event, and he was never late. But emotionally, he could be absolutely unpredictable and do what no one expected him to do, like his famous conducting of an orchestra, for example. And again, he was overwhelmed by emotions. He turned his head and saw that Shevchenko was the only one who was objecting and dragging him away. All the other people around him were applauding.
He was ushered into power by the great hopes of his people. He left office full of regrets for not fulfilling all of them. And it was only after Yeltsin passed away that his country can start to examine his legacy in all its complexity.
Yeltsin's 70th birthday was celebrated with far fewer accolades, but 1 decade later, even those who criticized him very harshly are growing a bit more gracious in their assessment of his character and his policies, because even they have come to realize that with all his ups and downs, Yeltsin was the very epitome of Russia in the 1990s. Boiko, RT, Moscow.